So Sean's already introduced me. So I run a technical team for North America that helps customers kind of evaluate our technologies and solutions, and very fortunate to have a lot of smart people. You'll see Simon later today talking about this. I see Marius in the front, so a lot of smart people you should definitely meet and talk to. I just type emails and tell salespeople to stay away from them. So what I'm hoping to do, my role after following up on Maureen, is to set a little bit of context around Red Hat's perspective on integration. So I'm going to take a little bit, still a little high level, kind of setting the stage, put a little more context around integration problem that we've seen from the customers that we've talked to, talk about some of the technical architectural approach. They still let me talk about a little bit about technology, and then talk a couple of customer examples that are out there to kind of make this concrete and real. So I'll set that up, and hopefully that'll set the stage for some of the conversations that'll happen later today that'll provide a lot more of the technical detail around that. So as Maureen said, we're seeing the landscape changing pretty dramatically in the market itself, certainly for integration specifically. What our customers are telling us is, over the last, I would say 10 years, even over the last 5 years, we're seeing the use of data has dramatically gone up. Everybody wants to do artificial intelligence, machine learning, use these massive data lakes they've got taken advantage of. Mobile has become the primary device of interaction, as opposed to screens or desktops coming out there. Social media is key to every business. That's the primary way that you're both getting your message out there as well as interacting directly with your customers. In some cases, quite novel and unique ways. With the Amazon Alexa and all the other things that people can talk to vendors in your living rooms. So social media is amazing in that sense. Be spooky in that sense too. Cloud, we heard a lot about that from Maureen around workloads going to the cloud. Internet of Things, just the number of devices that are connected to the internet are up in the tens of billions. How do you take advantage of that? How do you deal with that within your businesses? And just the API economy, the whole software is eating the world kind of metaphor. Every company is a software company. Everyone now is looking at how they take what maybe had been internal capabilities of a business and now expose those out as APIs to both work better with their partners, as well as possibly generate new revenue streams for their companies. So this is a very different landscape than 5 or 10 years ago. And so how do you kind of deal with that? And what others are saying around this is that to get competitive advantage, it's not that you do one of these really well. You have to do many of these really well. You have to figure as a business, how do I engage across all of those different changes, cloud, social media, mobile? How do I take advantage of all that? And I would argue that's primarily in the integration space. You need to integrate with all of these different communication channels, with your partners, with your customers in new and novel ways. And so I think this has become, again, as an integration guy, I think the world is all about integration. So this is a kind of a core thrust for why integration is really, really important, is to do that to get you competitive advantage. Now, we talked about this whole session as agile integration. We talk about this is agile in the sense of moving fast, not agile as in the development methodology, though they're related. I always ask, because I put this up, and I always want to check with the audience. So this is going to be, I'm going to ask questions. Not everyone gets to sleep and pay attention. So are you hearing this from your management around agile, the need for speed and change? Is that still a relevant term, or has it become kind of a markety buzzword? Is it still relevant to your management? It's coming down. Agile, we need to be agile. We need to move fast. Yeah, a lot of head nods. Okay, awesome. So, obviously the ability to move quick is very important. What we're hearing is that technical teams are saying that traditional methodologies, traditional technology stacks, traditional approaches to building technologies have to change as well, because to gain that speed, which is really what Agile is about, how do I react, how do I both react and, I guess proact into these situations quicker, traditional technology stacks don't work, and traditional approaches don't work. It's not that I should qualify that. they work well in a slower world. If you need to change things in the order of days to weeks, they don't work. So it's sort of the need for speed is causing changes in how we approach that in terms of drives towards APIs, how we engage, microservices. Maureen talked about that. The idea of continuous delivery. How do I roll out technology, all the time? How can I deploy in multiple times an hour if I wanted to? Containers has been talked about a lot. Functions as a layer even on. Teams that need to move fast are saying that they need these. Oh, got a different echo coming in now. Hopefully no fire alarms either. Another change that's also happening just beyond sort of the technology and process stacks, and Maureen touched about this as well, is where integration is happening is now not just in your data center. You have to kind of do the integration where the applications are. Software as a service or in the application clouds. So you're doing integration in lots of different places. It's very, very, very distributed. And that brings its own sort of unique challenges. Distributed architecture has been around for a very long time, but it has its own set of unique challenges, unique problems that have to be dealt with when you're dealing with that. And again, this is sort of a landscape that's coming out that you need to kind of consider. I'd also argue that who is doing the integration is different. So now it's not just the central integration team, the integration competency center. It's not just in their world. We're seeing a lot of, still technical folk, but in the lines of business that are, and probably all of you have done some of this as well. You're dealing with Salesforce.com. You're building out some custom spreadsheets that kind of connect to that, to connect to other systems. You're building custom reporting. You're building lots of applications, but those are now being used to run the business. So a lot of the integration is happening out in the different lines of business. And it has to, because everybody kind of needs that ability to kind of move quick and do what they need to do. And they can't wait for some central team to figure out requirements and kind of waterfall develop something new to deal with whatever their needs are. Because their needs will probably be different by the time that gets rolled out. So it's a lot of change that's happening at this point. So we would argue that this is what's driving this idea of API-centric integration. And I always qualify this slide in the sense of, there's this movement from centralized architectures, SOA, ESBs, all that kind of traditional technology from 5-10 years ago, to this idea of APIs and integration. Now, this is not to say, because I've gotten hit with this when I presented this before. This is not to say that this whole centralized world is bad. I would argue that this is a spectrum, and it's sort of efficiency versus agility. Sort of, good practices. Getting to a central team gets you a level of efficiencies. You can get vendor consolidation. You can get technology stack consolidation. Those are good things. And there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do that in an organization. But generally, that's slower because it's one team you've got to deal with. I've got to coordinate with another team to get them to go do that, to align to best practices, to align that common tech stack. If your business is saying, hey, that's great, I want efficiencies, but I need it tomorrow, well, okay, you can't do that. You have to pick. So there's this drive to agility, a drive to speed that's causing sort of a different technology stack. Again, that example of you've got your CRM system, people are building out custom reporting or integration workflows around that. The lines of business have lots of applications that are being built out around that. How do I enable that kind of behavior, still have security? Maureen talked about that. I can't just let anybody kind of do whatever they want with all of my business data. That's not good. So how do I kind of allow that speed, allow that kind of different sets of people integrating with the different teams and different places where the integration's happening? How do I allow that? How do I have common policies around that? API management deals with some of these issues. The idea of distributed integration deals with some of these issues. So but again, a spectrum. So I'm not knocking on, because I I've presented in front of rooms, and there's integration competency center people there, and they're like, hey, are you saying we're, like, no, I love integration competency center people. They're great. It's just saying there's a spectrum and there's a need. So you've got to kind of think about this as you're presenting, or thinking about this as you're building out your systems. So what you get out of this is the idea of, by picking things like API technologies, there's the idea of sort of there's a whole tooling ecosystem that's coming around that. So it's not somehow that, you know, REST or gRPC is somehow a magical technology that's going to make all things better, versus, you know, SOAP web services or whatever. It's more, at this point, you know, things have evolved, and there's a kind of a tooling and a best practice architecture around that as well. So it's built into more of a self-service culture around that. So there's abilities for, again, software companies have done that, or SaaS companies have done that well. EC2's done that really well. It's very easy to kind of script up things against APIs, and there's a lot of toolings that have been built around that. So this idea of a tooling capability is really good. The idea of having collaboration with your partners. So if you build out APIs, and we've had a number of customers, I think SCHIPHOL Airport, others have talked about the idea of taking what had been internal systems that they put an API on, and then suddenly they realized that that would be valuable to expose out to their partners, or maybe even to their customers. You know, this is sort of the apocryphal thing of Amazon Web Services with thou shalt use APIs everywhere, and then realizing, hey, wait, we should actually expose these out to the customers and let those use directly. So, you know, that level of collaboration is really good. It's also something for you to think a lot about when you're building it, because what you think is going to be an internal-based system may eventually be an external exposed system as well. So how do you build that collaboration, kind of the culture of building that, assuming that's going to happen all the time? And then again, the idea of how do I do this quickly? So how do I build it? How can I make it stable so that people can kind of build stuff against it, but also kind of adapt quickly? So all of this to try and get speed. So, and of course, all this ties into, you know, the digital transformation that's built out there. You know, people are talking about speed. And I think this picture is pretty apropos for some of this, and again, that kind of spectrum that I'm talking about. You know, so if you think of, you know, people changing tires, you all have cars, you know, maybe. You know, cars have been, car tires were designed for efficiency and mass market production. It's not something you're going to change in 5 seconds. You know, you probably don't, hopefully, do it very often. So, you know, they're designed for being stable and slow and effective and efficient. Your car tires. Now, if you're in a race car, that doesn't work. So if you need speed, you have a different set of tools. You have a different team organization. You have different processes around that. They may not be the most efficient. You see race car teams out there, they have 4 people changing 4 tires, 1 per tire. It's faster. It is not the most efficient way to do it. If your goal is speed, that's okay. Having those extra people may more than make up for the change in the ability to kind of do that. If you're you're dealing with your home car, the idea that it's going to take, you know, 4 or a team of, you know, 12 people to go change your tire, you know, on your car thing, maybe not. Probably not worth it for you. So, you know, that's something to kind of think about, and kind of remind your business and remind your executives, is that as they're pushing for speed, as they're pushing to become the new digital platform for whatever you all do, you know, there's going to be a mindset. There has to be a give and take here. So when you're making the case to your management, saying, hey, you're asking us to do something quite different. You're asking us not to be efficient, you're asking us to be fast. Realize there's a trade-off. Realize that that's going to cause not only just different technology tools, it's going to cause different people organization and other things. So it's something to kind of be thinking about as you come into it. So again, this whole people platform process approach. Not just technology. We all love technology, right? It's always about technology. If I just have that latest piece of software, if I download the nightly build, man, it's going to fix it. But it's also, I believe that, and it's also about people. My team reminds me all the time, it's supposed to be about people too. Yeah, okay. And the processes that are there. So with people, this is the DevOps mantra that's there. Make sure you've got the right people in the room. Again, the team organization for the pit crew and the race team, it's having the people that are going to fill the gas tank and raise the car up and change the tires and like whatever they need to do. Like that's the team. They practice together. They work together. So if you're building an application, microservices supports this style. If we're building a piece of capability, have all of the key stakeholders as part of that team. You're going to gain communication efficiencies that come out of that. The team is going to be able to interact with each other in new ways that's going to make it quicker. Again, you may have some redundancy of people in terms of multiple people to do it, but it's going to get you speed. It's a trade-off you have to make. In terms of platform, we'll talk, and some of this aligns to what Maureen talked about. I talked about the need for distributed integration. Maureen talked about her event pipelines, so the event that has got to be event-oriented. The idea of patterns-based, big fan of Gregor Hoppe, Bobby Wolf's book, Enterprise Integration Patterns, from probably, 12, 13 years ago, I think that was written. Great book if you haven't read it. Sort of standard pattern-based approaches to integrations so that you can deal with it. So I think, having that ability to kind of do whatever style of integration you need. If you want to consolidate it to get some centralized efficiencies, great. That technology stack should allow you to do it. If you need to do little bits of integration all over the place, great. You should still be able to do that as well. And it should still kind of follow best patterns because then you can hire people against that. It's easier to train people against those patterns, very important, and kind of supporting the architectural styles you need. Containers, Maureen talked about that as well. This is sort of the new paradigm of how things are being deployed. So I think gaining the efficiencies there and the portability that containers can bring. So, it's a lighter weight mechanism than necessarily virtual machines. Not necessarily that virtual machines are bad, but you can generally get, higher server density on that. It's much easier to move them to the cloud. It's been talked about, most customers that we've talked to are deploying across multiple clouds. They're deploying on-premise, to Amazon, to Azure. They want to have that choice and flexibility. Containers have demonstrated themselves as a pretty good mechanism to kind of move workloads around as you need. And we've certainly seen a lot of customers do that. Even on a daily basis, they're spot trading against Amazon and Microsoft to figure out, hey, where am I going to run my Hadoop cluster today? And so if I can have the setup for that, great. I can take care of market advantage, pricing advantages there. So advantages in that sense. And then APIs in terms of reusability and sort of that self-service. And that's also kind of a contract. Steve will talk about that later, but the idea of how do we, kind of manage the units of deployment. So again, not just the technology. APIs is not just about the technology, but it's also an approach to how you're kind of thinking about building out your services such that people can depend on them, therefore they're going to use them. And so how do you kind of manage them as products coming in there? So I think these are kind of key, pillars of anybody's integration process kind of going forward. You should be thinking about like what are these technology stacks are. And then from a process perspective, if you bring these together, the ideas of automating everything. Anything that you can automate, you should. Again, it's a good thing for speed. It's going to get you consistency. If people have to kind of do everything, to provision up a new test server or whatever, I need a person to go do it, it's going to take a while. If I can just push a button and have an Ansible playbook or a Terraform script or Cloud Formations kind of do that all for me, awesome. Then I know not only is it going to be quick, but it's going to be the same. It's going to be consistent every time and treat that as code. Shared building blocks, shared technology stacks, again, pattern-based. It doesn't have to necessarily be the same technology. I know I'm a software vendor up here, and of course it all should be Red Hat technology, but I know that's not realistic. But at least kind of adopting where there seems to be de facto standards, using technologies that adopt those standards is a good thing. Again, from not just if people are going to move quick, you can kind of use the technologies that are the right things, but it allows you some consistencies around training and practices and automation because they've adopted particular standards or patterns. And that's important. People are, difficult. People are difficult. It can be difficult to retrain people on different technology stacks if you've got to move them across, if you've got to shift people across different teams. So again, that idea of how do you have those different patterns is really, really important. And again, that's sort of the DevOps in terms of how do I organize these teams in ways that make sense. Again, microservices are great. I don't think I've ever seen a pure microservices. I don't even know what that would look like. But as people kind of move that direction to gain efficiencies out of that, how do I organize that? How do I reorganize that based on your enterprise? Every company's got a slightly different way about it. Having a few microservices might be good enough. Having thousands might work great for you. And then next year it's something different. That's fine, but being able to think about that processes. Okay, so the one product slide, I did say, we're our product vendor. So for us, Red Hat, this is where this kind of aligns from a software stack perspective. Fuse and AMQ, our messaging products, kind of work really well on the integration pattern. Apache Camel, which is a key technology within Fuse, works really well with the enterprise integration patterns that are there. OpenShift is our containers, Kubernetes-based platform. A lot of great technology on that front. And 3Scale is our API management platform. So certainly encourage people to kind of look at that and consider that coming in. We also have consulting. We also have partners that do a great job around this in terms of the practices as well, in terms of helping people do that. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about, a lot of context and fluff. And so let me talk a little bit about who's actually done this. Has anybody actually done this stuff? So Schiphol Airport, third largest airport in Europe. They've got about 60 million customers, I think last year, a year or so ago, that come through it, about 1.7 million in cargo. So pretty big airport. They still want to be the best digital airport in the world. Their goal. They want to encourage more, foot traffic, more cargo traffic through their airport. People don't generally think about that. We all go through airports to do it. Airport's a business. They want to make sure they get more traffic going through that. That's how they make revenue. So they decided to come at this from a sense of they want to be the best digital airport. Now, what does that mean? It's an airport. It's a physical place. What does that mean to be digital? Well, they want to make sure that their customers have an awesome experience going through that. Again, maybe we don't all think about airports as an awesome experience, but they wanted to do that. So, they work, and now, I think we see it, LaGuardia, others now have a lot of this. You go in there, you sit down at a restaurant, they've got the panel up, they tell you, I'm going to this thing, it'll tell you if your gate's changed while you're having a coffee, or whatever. That's what they mean by sort of the customer experience. Schiphol Airport wanted to make sure that everything was deeply integrated, third-party apps tied into it, so as they had gate changes, they did it with other things. All of that was a deep integrated experience for them. So they took the idea of integration and APIs to build out a partner ecosystem, both with all of their sort of on-premise vendors that they're working with, as well as third-party providers, so that other mobile application vendors and others can kind of integrate with their systems, so that, again, they can have a seamless experience for their both sort of air traffic, airplane customers, as well as their cargo customers. So they can kind of have that seamless experience be kind of a key part of that whole mechanism. So they were looking at this, and they saw APIs, in their case, sort of reduced their development times by 50%. So they were able to kind of get APIs out. They were able to onboard new partners, new developers much, much quicker because they adopted a lot of these both technologies and practices around that. So they kind of made everything was about APIs. Any service they built inside was going to be like an API-driven system, so they could expose that out to try and be kind of an integral part of that whole kind of air travel experience. Sort of ended up with an airline kind of a theme here. Lufthansa Technik is in the maintenance, repair, and overhaul business. So they do, I think it's on the order of 1,700 airplane inspections a day that they're dealing with. So their goal is to be servicing. They're trying to make sure, and they're building out a platform called Aviator that is a predictive failure system. So they're kind of looking at it to say, when can we anticipate that maintenance will be needed on planes so that we can kind of rotate them out without impacting air travel, which is very important. You know, we've all did that. I had that flying down in here from Boston today. I had, you know, 3 different issues that were on the planes, and it was like, okay, can we get, you know, they're not using Lufthansa Technik apparently, but you know, the idea of how can we figure that again to have a better experience. So for them, you know, their idea is how do I be a digital platform for this, integrate with all my airline partners, deal with all of the manufacturers around that, and connect all those systems. Again, a deep integration experience, a lot of data pipelines. So now in this case, they're trying to connect to sensors and devices and planes to actually get information to actually make a prediction, machine learning, around when will maintenance be needed. So again, kind of an integration problem, but in this case, they've got to kind of plug into the sensor streams for all of this information so they can gather it and actually make predictions about when stuff needed, and then contact the airports, the vendors to say, hey, you need to, you know, you should really rotate this plane out at this point in time to do this before there's a real issue. So kind of, again, plugging into that whole ecosystem and do that. Now, Lufthansa also is interesting in that for them, they really also kind of embrace the whole open source thing. And so I'll talk about that for a second too, is that they're saying the airline industry generally is not considered an open environment. It's a very proprietary technology environment. So they also, beyond kind of building this highly interconnected platform, they also took a step to say they really wanted to embrace open source to build communities around that, because they found that that was an additional benefit to bringing on more people to their platform. So that if they encouraged open source communities of frameworks that leverage their platforms, that made it easier for customers to deeply integrate it, because you know, these kinds of integrations are not easy, and airlines never retire protocols. I've talked to some airlines that they still have teletype codes that are deeply part of the reservation system, and it's the last step, some from 35, 40 years ago. So they, you know, integration can be quite challenging there. So the idea that if they build out frameworks and have open source communities around that, that's going, you know, that allows their customers, that allows system integrators to share code to make it easier for them to adopt this platform. That was good for the airline industry and good for Lufthansa Technik, because it encouraged adoption of it. So it's not just, again, APIs is not just purely a technology, but it's also a means of, in their case, building out open source communities around it to increase adoption. Something I've seen a number of our customers take advantage of, just to kind of pound the open source drum a little bit, but you know, we've seen a lot of customers starting to adopt that kind of approach to gain adoption on whatever techniques they're building out there. So it's something to think about, and APIs is a great way to do that, because it allows you to kind of manage what your intellectual property is, but still sharing out your service capabilities in a way that others can take advantage of it. UPS, the brown truck people, Innovation Award winner. Lufthansa Technik was also an Innovation Award winner from Red Hat Summit this year. So they deliver, I think it was what, 20 million packages a day through the system. So in their case, they've, you know, integration is sort of a key component of a lot of what they've done. I think I've had a lot of experience with UPS. So they definitely have a lot of deep integration. It's a key part of their supply chains. You know, when you order Amazon packages and one of their trucks shows up at one of their various distribution centers, you get a notification that's, you know, going through Red Hat technology as well. So there's a lot of interesting, you know, deep integration points that they've tied into, and sort of being part of again, a customer's supply chain, very important to what they're doing. I think UPS has done a number of very innovative things. This is also a case of where their integration competency center, I think, took a very innovative approach. So rather than, when they adopted a lot of these integration technologies, rather than saying, hey, come to us as the integration experts, don't you do it, you know, bring all your things to us, they actually took an enablement approach. So they started hosting internal developer conferences, they started sharing best practices, and so they took the view that as an integration competency, their view was to educate other project teams on the best ways to do integration at UPS. Here are technology stacks that we've done, share knowledge, share best practices. They had shared operations. If you wanted to take advantage of it, great. If you didn't, that's fine. But they were sharing a lot of that. That got them to a lot of great adoption and enhancements in their capabilities in a much quicker fashion. So, and which now we're sort of seeing sort of foreshadowed some of the DevOps kind of capabilities. How do we bring that together? So I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of how they deployed a lot of this technology. But again, they've dramatically reduced. I think in this case I think it was in the 100 days kind of categories when they brought up a container platform. They had something up and running within 100 days, which was normally they were saying at UPS it was like 18 months to deploy some new pilot application. So for them, that was like a massive milestone to be able to do something in like 100 days to bring in a whole new platform and roll out an application. So they found a lot of speed, and they've accelerated since then. And I guess in this sense, Gartner thinks that, Red Hat, I guess, hyping up Red Hat a little bit, Gartner loves us, IDC loves us, Maureen's back, okay, yeah. We got a Cody Award for our API management solution, which is great. And then I certainly will give a plug to IDC in the sense that IDC's done some great write-ups. They've talked to a number of Red Hat customers out there to actually get a lot of deep insight into what business benefit they actually realized. And they've anonymized some of that data. So they've done some really good studies around this. So again, if this is something you're looking to talk to your management about changing how you're doing integration, certainly encourage you to talk to IDC around this. They've got a lot of great data about business benefit that other companies have realized by adopting some of these new techniques and challenges. Doesn't have to be Red Hat, obviously we're the best, but it doesn't have to be that, but some of the approaches and styles that have come in, they've taken advantage of that. So, kind of wrap up. Since I didn't have any alarms or anything coming off, I can maybe catch up on a little bit of time. So, digital transformation, I think the current market conditions that are out there are causing a lot of, changes, again, in that people, process, and platforms. You have to think about difference if you want speed. It's not to say that sort of traditional ways of doing it are bad, but if you're looking at speed in certain places, you've got to kind of think about that differently. Again, think about that racing pit crew kind of approach. That there's a different way you've got to come at that. Certainly would encourage people to, there's a bunch of Red Hatters here and others, but certainly there's a lot of my team will help with technical evaluations of the various products. If you want to go deep, we have we love having deep conversations around it, helping customers get hands-on with this. It's open source, so we love people kind of playing with it to see if it's actually real. Before you have to necessarily commit into it, we want to actually see if we can help you solve their problems. So certainly we want to encourage you that, and we can help, partner with partners like Missouri and others. We can certainly do things like discovery sessions and things with you as well to kind of figure out, does this make sense for you? How would you actually roll that out within your company? What might be good candidate applications to try? So a lot of those are ways we can engage. And there's certainly a ton of, I think we'll share all these slides out, but there's a lot of great resources both on the Red Hat site as well as IDC has a lot of great information around these different changes and more information that you can use as well. I'll try and catch up a little on time, so thank you. Any questions? Any
questions for Scott at this point?
Oh, Steve is going to ask me a question. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Given you do a lot of integration, and integration means, in my mind, is you do a lot of translations. And therefore, you take those translations to a central place so that you can make a proper decisions and things like that.
Okay.
So I wonder, actually, because of translations, you may lose certain information and accuracy of the end result. Can you comment on those? And given that this is applied in the airline industry, which is a very, very, accuracy is very much in demand. So I'm curious how that works. Thank you.
In terms of dealing, so the question's around when you're doing a lot of transformations, there's a potential for information loss in that. It's not a technology problem. It's more of, you have to understand the domain. This is probably what you knew already. So there's no magic technology that's going to ensure that all of the information in one format is correctly gone over, because there's sort of carrying the values over as well as the sort of semantic, the context around that. And so usually it's going to still require a lot of smart people to make sure that whatever the information in one model gets translated to another model that carries over the right context around that. So maybe it's not the answer you're looking for, but that's what a lot of our customers have spent time looking at, particularly if they're dealing with like protocol or data format transformations. They spend some time thinking about the models and making sure that the model they're transforming to actually carries the semantic context around, so that there isn't a kind of a loss at that point as it moves downstream. They also spend, I don't know, I think all this is public. Some of the customers that I talked about also spend a bunch of time, they'll put out a lot of, do a lot of things with event-driven constructs. So they'll take data from various sources and publish that out on topics for others to consume. Again, a traditional event-driven architecture. They spend an enormous amount of time building out data dictionaries to document what each of the data fields means, what the sources of those data are, who to talk to if you want more information about where did this data value come from. So I think that's how a lot of companies have dealt with, if I've taken data from someplace else, transformed it to something else, and then I'm publishing it in an event-driven architecture. I think the successful companies have included, and I think this is a best practice even in data science, is put a sort of a data dictionary, document up all of the data, the sources, so that you can share that out, so that at least whoever's consuming it has access to that information, so they can both understand where it came from as well as the context.
I was going to ask you what kind of pain you went through in the Lufthansa example, but I guess you gave some at least clues right now. So if you have more insights, please do. Thanks.
Well, yeah, hopefully not more than I'm going to get in trouble with confidentiality agreements, but yeah, I mean, Lufthansa, UPS, all of them have dealt with that problem, so.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I work for big organizations, and you have developers scattered across organizations. Asset management has their own, trade has their own, cybersecurity. So how do we go about standardizing the environment such that we're following the same integration framework, the same microservices framework, and API framework?
That's a great question. I think I'm probably going to answer it in a different way. So I think that falls into that spectrum of efficiency versus agility. I think a lot of customers we're seeing now are actually realizing they need to have multiple technology stacks around this, and because either they've got different governance domains that they need to deal with, or just needs for speed around this. So the degree where people have agreed, they kind of gone up a level, and they kind of look at patterns, best practices, architectural styles, and saying, hey, at least let's make sure that these technologies and kind of meet a common approach. That tends to be more effective than saying thou shalt use this technology across a lot of political domains. It can be impossible. I think I've seen so many knife fights between divisions about my tech stack is better than your tech stack. You're never gonna win that battle. It's gonna be more like, okay, can we at least agree on, like an integration? Like, hey, we're gonna all agree that we're gonna use enterprise integration patterns as our common language. So Gregor Hopi's book, like, hey, we're gonna talk about, content-based routing and filters. Like, we're gonna use that language, and we're gonna come up with mappings to whatever the different technology stacks are. So at least we can speak effectively across that, document, like in the case of sharing data, how do we talk about that? I think that tends to be a more effective approach to that. I would love to say, just adopt Red Hat everywhere. That would be great, but that's not realistic in most companies. So I don't know if I'm capturing your question right around how. Well, and I think the other example I used around UPS in terms of the integration competency centers, I think customers that have taken an enablement approach, so if they've got a particular tech stack or to actually kind of sell that internally. So if one group is kind of advertising that, having developer conferences, using open source, whether internally or externally, like sharing and building up communities of practice around that is, kind of taking an educational approach as opposed to a governance mandating approach, I think can be a much more effective way to do it as well. Sort of solicit. It takes a little bit more work. The CEO of Red Hat wrote a great book called The Open Organization, talks about this as it takes a little more work to kind of educate people, to build consensus, but then once you do, it's your organization is much more effective because now everyone's bought into a decision and they move much quicker, as opposed to kind of with a governance mandate, it tends to be, okay, I got to do it because they said it, and I'm gonna be, like the kids that you're told, hey, you got to go, we're going to whatever event they don't want to do. They're like, okay, I'm gonna go as slow as possible. If you get people excited, then they're gonna move a lot quicker. So I don't know, but I think that kind of approach, again, the kind of the open sourcey way, I think it helps bring teams together. And again, sort of common practices and models tends to be probably a more effective. That's something it's probably easier for people to agree with than the single tech stack.
Anyone else have a question?
I have a question regarding, I guess, the use case that you described with UPS, with the airport in Amsterdam, and also Lufthansa.
Yep.
So looking across them, it seems like the mission criticality is different, right? Whether you get a notification to change gate while you drink coffee, or the plane is ready for maintenance or services. So just a curiosity across your observation, do different companies and they sort of maintain like a parallel with their old system still in place while still kind of slowly adopting the API? Or what is their confidence or reluctance when it comes to critical and risky decisions?
Sure. So you're talking about the sort of if I'm summarizing right, so the criticality of the levels of integration across the three different use cases I did seems to be different, and how do customers kind of manage that? Is that?
Or even just more generic in the landscape when it comes to mission critical projects and functions. What is the practice at this day and age?
Sure. So mission critical practices. So I'll try and get both parts of that. So I would actually argue, in the sense of like SCHIPHOL Airport, the fact that people have that good experience, drinking their cup of coffee and getting to the right gate, they probably would consider that mission critical, because customer satisfaction is what's going to drive foot traffic through their airport, which is core to how they make money. So for them, that's critical. That one particular gate change may not be, but if you get too many people that have bad experiences, the use of the airport drops. So for them, it's critical. It may not be, losing a package. UPS case, one package may not be a big deal, but if that's a trend, that's a really bad thing. So I think for each of them, so again, talking about at least those three use cases, I think, and again, I'm an integration person, so there's kind of the common theme is integration. I think for all of them, they decided the idea of becoming a digital platform was about deeply integrating into the supply chain, or sort of that whole customer value chain for them. Like that was the critical aspect for them, is like, how do they kind of plug in seamlessly to however their kind of customers are interacting with it. Now, in terms of these digital transformations, I think if I get the second part of your question, it's sort of like, how do customers kind of manage that? In terms of like, hey, if I'm going to adopt new technologies, new practices, do I just go right for the most critical part of my business first, or do I go someplace else? No, I would not probably touch the most critical. I think the customers that have been really successful adopting this have started very small. It's a big this is a people cultural change problem. It takes a lot of effort to make that happen, and every company has sort of a different culture, so how that's actually going to transform and what that's going to end up looking like is always very different. So I think all of the customers that I've seen have done that well tend to start small. they find one group, that has maybe a kind of a relevant app, maybe probably not mission critical, but probably representative of lots of other types of apps they get out there, and they actually try and figure out what would a different team organization, different practices, different technology stacks look like in our company. Let's roll something into production here. Let's try and do it quick. Let's see how that worked. Okay, and if that works, then share that knowledge, try and do it again, get another project, do that. So I think I've seen companies do that and sort of snowball that effect out and kind of, again, advertise and build that community out there has been probably a much more effective approach. I think in UPS's case, it's been probably about a 8-year journey, 7, 8-year journey for them, from when we started a little tiny project to now they're retooling many, hundreds of different project teams that are touching these things. So I think it's getting faster because the industry is talking about a lot of these things, so the education barrier's smaller. I mean, DevOps and microservices are out there, but I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's like you have to kind of look at the education of your team and the risk tolerance of that team and your company and kind of break it down. But I think going to the most critical thing, probably not the best thing to do. Try and get some wins, try and get some experience, and then build on that. Okay.
Call it questions now. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Scott.